everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Pallas. This week's show is on what makes people vulnerable to cults. Thanks for joining us. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that like and subscribe. If you are on Facebook, grant StreamYard access so we can see your name when you comment or have a question. Please remember to keep all comments and questions related to the show topic and that this is a safe space. I want to give a big shout out to our top sponsors, Ruth, Kirsten, Michelle, Ray, and Heidi. Thank you so much for your generosity and support. If you like the show, please consider supporting it. You can go to sherrypallas.com and there's literally dozens of ways to support me and the show. But just being here, welcoming us into your home and joining the conversation supports me more than you know. I appreciate you. Okay, so let's meet our guests and get smarter. First, we have Diane Ben-Scotter. Diane founded Antidote NGO and authored Shoes of a Servant, My Unconditional Devotion to a Lie. She was a member of the religious cult known as the Moonies. Now she's a speaker and workshop facilitator. Because of her experiences in a cult and then as a deprogrammer, Diane realized that psychological manipulation is a public health problem. Antidote's purpose is to find comprehensive solutions to psychological manipulation and expose the dangerous and harmful effects of these deceptive tactics. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm really glad to join in the conversation.
Oh, it's going to be great. Next, we have Marty. Marty Faulkner is a military brat, 60s, 70s kid, reader, Christian, but not a fundy or conservative, 20 years professional musician, 20 years analytical chemist, and his hobbies include politics because he was a kid of the Vietnam War movement, and so he started following politics at age 12. He also loves history, philosophy, orchid horticulture, quality fiction, and is a movie enthusiast. Welcome, Marty.
Good to be here.
Thanks so much for coming back.
I'm glad, like I said, good to be here.
And last but not least, we have Reverend Greg Larson. He was born, baptized, confirmed, and ordained in the United Church of Christ. He's a traditional intentional interim police chaplain, former, church growth, and church crisis pastor. He co-leads the Detroit Beer and Hymns and is the first and only, to his knowledge, Space Force chaplain, because it says so on his Instagram profile. I still love that so much. Hi, Greg. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and I've yet to get an invitation into outer space.
Right? You know, we need to get on that. We really, really need to get on that.
Right.
Hello, Anna. Hey, Carl. Hey, Laura. Thanks for joining us. And Anna says you should be in the Garden of the Galaxies. So I really wanted to discuss this topic because it's personal for me. My mom was a very smart woman, albeit a bit naive, and she was always one toe into the cult. For instance, we attended one Sunday at Jim Jones's church in Oakland before he went and had the mass massacre in Guyana. She gave me as a birthday present when I was 10, the Kingdom of the Cults book, which totally influenced me into thinking that everything was a cult outside of Christianity. And then she ended up going pretty heads deep into it because she ended up disowning me because my sinful lifestyle of any sort, even as a teenager, meant that jeopardized her soul. So now that we see everything coming to the populace, you know, we see so many different cultish acts out there and groups that really have the distinction of following into these lines of cult behavior. So I wanted to talk about this, get the messages out there, and see how we can educate the audience to say, okay, these are the signs to look for. This is what you should be wary of, and how to communicate with your friends and loved ones if they are a victim of it. Diane, with your personal experience, I'll let you start.
Well, that's a big topic. I was in a religious cult for 5 years, and my family had me deprogrammed, and then I became a deprogrammer and started helping people exit. Um, Back in the day, the way that worked was through intervention style, where the families would stand in front of the doors and windows and not let the person
Wow.
leave until they talked this through. And sometimes that would be days, or like a week, 10 days. And at one case happened where I was young. I was in my early 20s then, and um, the person, everything went wrong in that case. They were followed when they were picked up by the family, and the police ended up coming to the house, but we had left already to go somewhere
Wow.
else. And anyway, she ended up going out the window and went to the police, and I was arrested for kidnapping. And
Wow.
and so I, accepted a plea bargain and didn't have to go to jail other than that first day when they booked me. But
Wow.
um, it sort of set a precedent that stands today that is a good thing. You can't hold someone against their will under those circumstances. And so, and I think that's better. But what happens is that families they don't know what to do about their loved ones that they've seen go down a rabbit hole of
Yeah.
conspiracy theories or in an official, no true ways about a cult kind of a group. And so they come to the nonprofit that I founded asking for help. And so we're trying to scale our services to the size of the current problem, which is enormous.
Yeah.
Last year alone, over 1,000 people came to our organization asking for help.
Wow.
And the majority of them were family members of people that had gone down the rabbit hole online, especially during the pandemic, and into kind of mega type or far right sort of extremist groups. And so it's the same no matter what the doctrine or belief system is. It's a matter of that people are in psychological pain of some sort. They are scared about the world that we live in, which is a confusing place.
Mhm.
They feel alone. They feel like life hasn't really given them what they expected. They're angry, they're lonely, and so this something in the messaging online resonates with them, and before you know it, the polarization that is intentional pushes them further and further into kind of an information silo, where then they believe that these very bizarre, sometimes like that JFK is coming back and will be reinstated, and
With
you know
Tupac.
well, there's so many different versions, and so it doesn't matter what the lies or what the theories are, the doctrine. What matters is that predators, basically psychological predators, take advantage of people on a psychological level, take advantage of their pain and their confusion, and think of them as assets and control them as much as they can. So, I mean,
Well,
I
the
could go on, but
National
I'll
Institute
take a
of
breath.
Health says that a generalized ego weakness and emotional vulnerability shows propensities towards dissociative states. Um, Tenuous, deteriorated, or non existent family relations and support systems, and inadequate means of dealing with exigencies of survival or history of severe child abuse or neglect. Those are the fundamental reasons why someone would fall into a cult. Do you agree with that?
I think so. I think that it's essentially, I just think of it as psychological pain. You know,
Yeah.
maybe someone just ended a relationship. Maybe they are struggling with anxiety and depression in a clinical sense. But it could be a variety of factors that just make them feel like life isn't going very well for them, and they feel better when life is served to them on a platter. It's easy answers to life's hard questions. They don't have to grapple with complexity. They get to feel exceptional. There's exceptionalism in that, and there's a form of self-righteousness kind of you get to feel. Plus you get community, and you have like-minded people surrounding you that you feel like you're fighting for the good cause. So that psychological pain that you're feeling is filled with these other things, but what you give up is agency and autonomy. You give up yourself.
Yeah, they definitely tend to isolate you. Greg, what say you?
Diane's touching on everything about the psychology of cults. There's a list that I was in touch with through my collegiate years at Grand Valley State University in my undergraduate studies in psychology, and having worked with a couple of deprogrammers as well, we understand the complexities of first just confronting someone. It's interesting too, Diane, to hear your story about being arrested for holding somebody against their will. And I know in Michigan, in Michigan's mental health code, we have mental health code 330.1401, which is a lot of people call it the Baker Act, but where basically if we feel a person is a threat to themselves or to the community, they can be held against their will. But that has to be done in a controlled setting.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
and there's a lot of gray in that,
Absolutely. But all the psychology behind it, that cults are attractive because they promote an illusion of comfort. Everything that you mentioned, financial security, total health, a constant peace of mind that doesn't tap into anxiety, or even in the religious setting, eternal life. If there's some type
Or
of
torture.
yeah. Well, certainly the understanding of hell and the concept of hell, as it's been preached by many mainline denominational churches across America, is one that is used to control and manipulate their believers. But cults satisfy the human desire for absolute answers, good and evil, religious answers, meaning of life, even in politics.
But it's what sets them apart though is like they only know the secret, right? And that's part of the isolation. I can't talk tonight. The separating of your family, your friends, and getting them. I mean, my mom happily gave up anybody who she viewed as being sinful. Anybody, friends, family, everything.
It's that we know the answer, they don't, us, them. And I know, Marty, you'll probably explain a little bit more with that family dynamic about being involved in a cult too. As you mentioned, if your family isn't in it, they're going to work to isolate you from that. If your family's in it, it's just one more member to bring on board into the same cult, and that's all right. But there's all kinds of the psych background that people fall vulnerable to. Cult life can have such a lasting and dangerous effect, and that's why as an ordained pastor, I have to recognize my own almost indoctrination, if you will, into a culture of Christianity that I was brought up in. And if I don't do the work, I don't want to say deprogram. I think that would be not right for me to take that term. If I don't unpack my upbringing, if I don't self-differentiate my upbringing within my faith, then I think I just follow along like everybody else in a cult, and what I believe in then doesn't become real. So I've got to do that unpacking that, like one of our wild goose friends, to deconstruct what it is that I think I know.
Marty, you said that you were brought up with your family in a cult.
Well, actually, it was my sister who really got involved, and this was early in my career as a musician. I was away a lot. My sister was one of those kids, beautiful young woman, but she went through a very long, awkward phase, and then suddenly blossomed in her junior year of high school and went from being the girl that nobody paid attention to the girl that everybody wanted to get their hands on. And ended up dating some of the worst guys imaginable. And I ended up, I was on the road playing music, and she went to a thing called the Rock of Ages, which was held by an organization called the Way International, which billed themselves as a non-denominational Christian sect and Bible research organization, which was really kind of a crock because they didn't have anybody who spoke Greek or Aramaic or Hebrew, and but they said that they had scholars. So it was, they would surround you with a bunch of really pretty people who would basically treat you as though you were part of their group, the cool kids table,
Mm.
and and convinced her to do what was called WOW, which is Word Over the World, where they moved her to a little town of Greenville, Texas, which is just outside of Dallas. She went to work in a fast food restaurant where she was expected to pay all her bills, and she lived with two other girls and a senior girl who basically they all they did was they studied the word, um, and read books by the founder of the organization, Victor Paul Wierwille, and the current president at that time, who was L. Craig Martindale. Um, Both of these, now Victor Paul was actually a pretty smart guy. He ended up in Harvard at the Divinity School, but all he ever studied was finance while he was there, church finance, and then bailed, never graduated, never studied Greek, never took any courses in preaching or anything like that. No heavy duty Bible, just how to make money or how to manage money. And he started his organization like at 42, and then by 52 it became the Way Incorporated, and then it became the Way International. There was a history he had of sexual abuse of the younger women. And at a certain point, he got a little older, and he brought in Craig Martindale, who was kind of his acolyte. But Craig had a huge ego and also was a serial abuser of women. But Craig was young and dynamic and good-looking, athletic, and was made the centerpiece to bring in more young people. And they really went hard after the flower children of the late 60s, early 70s. And
Which were the Moonies, right?
Yeah,
And that's what Diane was a part of.
but somehow they missed me. But then I don't think I would have seen right through that crap. I'm too much of a skeptic to buy into somebody, no matter how likable they are. If I tend to dig deep, and that's just me.
Well, see, but that's part of the mystery and the questions that I have. I mean, my mom was the ultimate skeptic until it came within the walls of the church. Like, for instance, she thought that fortune tellers, anything like that was pure demonic.
Yeah.
Until one came to the church. Mm-hmm. And then she's dragging me there, going, oh my God, you have to listen to this. So what is it that, this goes out to the entire panel, but what is it that gets these smart, previously skeptical people to just believe everything?
I think that there was a couple things that Greg said that are going through my mind now as you ask that question. And I think it's important. The word cult is, I think, less important in my mind than and the word deprogramming. Those are kind of loaded words that basically just mean, to most people, their reaction to those words are, ooh, weird, and that could never happen to me. And so I think that what's important to understand is psychological manipulation. I believe strongly that it's a public health issue and that we need a public health approach to the problem, which, a public health approach, you work in pillars. You have to do policy kind of driven stuff like tobacco. For instance, now there's laws that say you can't smoke on planes or in public places. That was because of a public health approach to the problem of tobacco causing cancer, cigarettes. And so, but they also had to do massive education to get us to the tipping point, or herd immunity, if you will, of people that understand that cigarettes cause cancer. The same thing with psychological manipulation. And then the third pillar is helping those that are directly affected, like the loved ones and the people that are in groups that need help getting out. So, for a public health approach to really solve this problem, I think it's important to point to the right thing. And it's not necessarily cults or cult leaders. There will always be predators, that people addicted to power, narcissists, who think of people as a resource, a way to have more power that they're addicted to, and feed their addiction to power with more and more people devoting themselves to them. That will always be there, but it will be minimized if people recognize their own vulnerability. We all have times, and there's a lie or a con type of a that works on a psychological level that can take advantage of you. Like Marty, you might not have fallen for that type of a group, but there might be other ways that you're susceptible to being taken advantage of on a psychological, some piece of you that needs something that you're not getting, that is offered to you, and there's a con behind it. There's a price bigger than what you see, really.
Oh, I've got my weaknesses.
Of course. And
we all do.
Yes. And so I think that that deconstructing that you were talking about, Greg, in your work and in faith leaders' work, I think it's so important to recognize that religion can be used as a means of control, especially with that fear of the devil, fear of eternal, damnation, and then this reward of eternal happiness. Those things can be used and are often used to control people on a psychological level. You take advantage of their fears and their desires to have goodness in their life, so.
Yeah,
Well, and I like
absolutely.
that you touched on smoking, because the tobacco companies still swear that cigarettes don't cause cancer. So the propaganda behind perpetuating these beliefs and keeping them in a cult doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And as a member of the cigarette cult, unfortunately, but they still swear that there's nothing wrong with cigarettes.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that the messaging is fact checked and verified. And there's so much faith that they put into the leaders and into the fragmented knowledge. Like, I see so many people like have a part of the truth, but it's so missed that it's something totally different. Greg, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, when you were mentioning about your mom and how she really didn't get into it until it came into the church, there's another little facet about cult psychology that states that if a cult is offering like a unique religious movement or something that's unique to a religious movement, and it feels safe, but it also offers a way for people to find their inner worth, to satisfy something that's missing, right? Then those people that hear that are more likely to believe every word that they are being told. And that's the tough part about being a pastor, about preaching. I had this book in seminary that was called Selling Swimsuits in the Arctic. It was one of those things that said, nobody in the Arctic needs a swimsuit, but here we are in the pulpit almost every Sunday, talking about something that really is invisible, that's by and large not tangible, believable, but not really present. So how do you preach that? And there's, I think, a difference between preaching that and selling it. I don't ever want to sell what I do. In that same light, we talk about the repetition of lies, and that goes so far back in our history. And, Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist, said if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it and will even come to believe it yourself if you repeat it yourself. And he also stated, too, that a lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. And I was just having this conversation earlier today with a bunch of my colleagues to where we were talking about how we have to do our work to dispel the lies of others that are being told as truths. And at the same time, we have to be able to dispel our own truths to kind of deconstruct, if you will, go back to that term again, and rebuild to make sure that the footing we're standing on is solid.
Well, I think one of the things that's really important is that when there are people that need something to be true desperately, depending on how much you need it, that's how hard it is to get out. And because if you really, if it fills your life, if it becomes your identity, if it becomes your community, if it become, if you really were lonely and you really were alone and you really didn't feel good about yourself, and now you really need it to be true, it doesn't matter how big the lie is. And those in power, even pastors that have good intentions, when someone needs it to be true so much, they become your most devoted person. And that is tempting to take advantage of when you have power. Power is a very high responsibility, I think. And if people are giving you their devotion or turning to you for the truth, then they're very vulnerable. You have to protect their autonomy and understand how you could take advantage of that, and religious leaders often do.
I think if I can interject something right here, I think when we talk about the truth, we're talking about a specific truth that this organization or that organization promotes as the truth, not necessarily the truth, but I think I used the word before we started, Gnosticism, a secret knowledge that you got this only from here and you would not know it otherwise.
That's right.
And power is a drug.
Yeah.
Once you get a taste of it, it's like any other drug. You just want more. To watching my family and what they've gone through, I mean, my sister was ready to abandon us all, but my mother, not wanting to lose her only daughter, jumped in with both feet, and my father, not wanting to lose my mother, jumped in with both feet.
Oh wow.
Myself, I went through classes and stuff, but I was traveling all the time. I didn't have time to be programmed by it. And I found it suspect to begin with because there was a lot of shady stuff going on and I could see it. And I guess that I recognize that because being in the music business, I saw a lot of drug dealing. And it looked criminal to me. And it's funny when you're around criminals and there's lots of them in nightclubs, you begin to see criminal activity lots of times where it doesn't even exist, but you can sniff it out when it does. I'm going to let you go on, but I just wanted to. I think the important part is when people believe something, no matter how ridiculous it is, and they fully buy into it, and everybody's telling them that they're correct. That it can be Q, it can be white nationalism, it can be the Moonies, it can be Jim Jones. It doesn't matter. It's all the same because getting hooked on drugs is easy. Getting off drugs is vicious hard. It's hard enough to quit smoking cigarettes.
No, it's very hard to quit smoking cigarettes.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I think is universal, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the cognitive dissonance that everybody would go through in trying to get out. And I see that, like, in any of the people, especially with my MAGA cult friends, for lack of a better term, I apologize if that's offensive, but they dig in so hard and get so angry that had I not experienced my mom literally on her deathbed freaking out that she may have got it wrong, she feared that she had the wrong beliefs. And that showed me the level of insecurities that are present in this cult like indoctrination, that they may say that they believe it all, but there's a part of them that goes, maybe not, maybe I'm not right. Do you guys see that? Is that a place to get into?
It's really scary to leave, because you have to face an identity crisis. I remember when I realized that actually maybe Sun Myung Moon was not the second coming of Christ, which I fully believed with every bit of my being. It was like I heard glass breaking around me in that moment during my deprogramming, that I because it started like a little tiny voice in the back of my head. What if this whole thing's a lie? And then it got to be undeniable that, oh my God, he's not this whole thing. It's just a lie. And who are you then? If you're not a disciple of Christ, if this whole thing's a lie, then it's not just the belief system that you're giving up. It's not, I think people tend to think, oh, why can't they see that this is disinformation if I just give them enough facts? But it's not an academic thing that's going on. It's your identity. It's to let go of that means, who am I? What do I believe? How do I view the world? Who can I trust? And it's a very, very scary moment in life to have a crisis of faith like that.
I know it. I went through it when I was 27, just from my evangelical upbringing. It's traumatizing.
Yeah, it's very painful. And you have to reestablish who you are. You have to build a new internal structure for yourself, for how you view the world, and how you learn to retrust. You have to build new relationships. You have to grieve the loss of everything you've just lost, all that good stuff of feeling like you were part of a community, feeling like you had the truth, the self-righteousness, everything is now gone, and you have to grieve that loss. I think it's very difficult and painful.
And the shame.
Oh,
and the feeling stupid. And I mean, I'm still peeling away layers of that onion.
Mm-hmm.
Greg?
Oh, man, it can be heavy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weight in recognizing something like that. And again, Sherry, it goes back to that little anecdote you mentioned about your mom on her deathbed, wondering in that moment, wait, was I right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a part of my continual conversation with myself as a pastor, where I ask myself that question a lot. Yeah. And I always want to come back to the answer that says, maybe, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I say I'm right, this is the way it is, I'm pretty sure in the faith that I believe in, that this God that we speak of is a lot bigger than anything I can possibly capture in this little screen right here. It's got to be bigger. And I've been questioned on that in my time as a pastor in leading churches on what I believe. It's interesting that we have a story like in the Gospels on the Sermon on the Mount, where the person that we believe in, Jesus Christ, talks about how to live this way. And yet all of our doctrine in the Christian church doesn't speak of any of that. It tells us what to believe. Jesus never spoke on what to believe, but taught us how to live it. All of our doctrine tells us what to believe, but not how to live it. And I think that's the curious part that I wrestle with in constant, just because so much of our churches are built on doctrine.
On doctrine and dogma and the separation and exclusivity. That's why my only gauge now is love. What is the most loving? All doctrine aside, how can I be the most loving in this situation? Um, Now that's the thought. I'm still human. But that's the goal is, no more follow this person, do this. It's anything I can do to become a more loving person. Because even saying better is kind of cliquish. In fact, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask. So is a cult just a clique with religion?
Well, it's so much more than that. But
Okay.
it's I think that being part of something and connected to a special group that you feel is somehow superior is something that people kind of long for and graft to
Mhm.
and enjoy being part of. It's it's all on a continuum, I think, as far as psychological manipulation is. Apple made a lot of money not selling hardware and software, but selling the idea that to have an Apple product makes you cool, you know,
True.
and and people would
Image.
wait in line not for those bells and whistles, which they like to say they were waiting in line for. That they were waiting in line to be the first one to have the
Yeah.
new Apple phone to show off with, you know.
It could be
And
an Apple phone. It could be a sneaker.
yeah, whatever it is, it's anything to make you feel like you're part of the cool kids is really a high level of desire that people have. You start learning it when you're a child that you
Yeah.
want to be part of the cool kids. But yeah, something you said I wanted to also speak to the concept of love being important. It seems so simple, but when I'm dealing with these families that don't know how to talk to their loved one and they've gone down this rabbit hole and now they're spouting this hatred, really. They're spouting this rhetoric that is just so divisive and hateful. And um, people don't know what to do and they get in arguments with their loved ones. And what I always try to take them to, most importantly and first, is empathy. you you don't plan on having a reasonable and effective conversation with this person if you can't empathize with why this was so compelling to them, which was the first question you asked, which was the theme of this whole conversation. Why is it so compelling? And if you want to help someone exit a situation in which they're being taken advantage of, you have to start with understanding where they were coming from, why they were vulnerable, why it was so compelling to them, and your love for them. I'm always excited. I feel like there is a solution when people come to my organization seeking help because they love that person enough to want to do anything, to want to find out how to help them. That love is the lever that will help that person out. If they just need to educate themselves about what the real problem is and maybe some communication tools so they can have effective communications. They need to listen, but this big of a pile of facts that go against their belief system isn't going to help one bit. It'll only push them further in.
So I have family members who are this high into MAGA, and it's the only time I see them angry. They are the sweetest people ever until the left does something or politics is brought into our conversation. And the only thing that I have known to do is to get to lower my voice and say, that's not true. That's not true. And then the conversation devolves and we end up talking about different things because it's just too hot of a topic.
Exactly.
So how do you get them to listen? Do they have to come to you first? Is this something that you have to wait for them to say, or can we grab them and say, please wake up?
I would advise in that kind of a situation of saying something to the effect of, wow, you really care about this. And I know what a good person you are. I've known you and loved you all your life. And I see that you really care about this. And I just wonder, because do you agree that there are such things as cults, that there are predators that will take advantage? I'm just wondering if there's any possibility at all that that could be going on. And I'd love to talk with you about that. Not when you're angry. I don't care what you believe. You can believe whatever you want. That's your choice. You're an adult, you know, and you have to make peace with your life. but I'm just worried about how much this you're really affected by this. And so would you be willing to talk about, not about your belief system and argue what's right and wrong, but about what psychological manipulation is and how it works? And if by any chance that's happening, of course you'd want to know. Wouldn't anyone want to know? And they'll say, of course,
Fantastic.
that's definitely not happening to me. But that's the way in. And maybe if you can plant a seed, because they're like in this world where there's this thick wall around them, and they only want to see what's inside there. And so if you see a crack and you can plant a seed, walk away, water it every now and then, but don't try to crash through. It won't help, you know.
Carl Forehand, who's watching right now, said that his son put it in his ear by saying, maybe you should rethink about that. So those little things do help.
Yes.
I can safely agree with you because I've gone both ways. Walter Martin, you mentioned Kingdom of the Cults earlier. Walter Martin, who wrote the book, was somebody who I met a few years ago, before his death. He had a ministry here in Charlotte where he was handing out degrees for basically to people to break up cults and how to speak to cultists and stuff. And he was 180 degrees off from how
What was his name again, Marty?
Walter Martin.
Huh.
He started the Christian Research Institute, CRI.
Uh-huh.
And actually a lovely man, just absolutely convinced he was right, but just absolutely not.
Well, I look at the book so differently now. I mean, back then it was like, oh my God, the Mormons are a cult. Catholics are a cult. Everything's a cult, and especially
everything's a cult. Oh yeah, he didn't even like C.S. Lewis.
No,
which was where I drew the line. He said Dietrich Bonhoeffer was preaching works righteousness, and I held up Matthew 6, 13 and 14 and said, well, explain this to me. But that's a long story for another time. He said to confront them on the leader, Victor Paul, and the crimes he's committed. And all that really did was create such a huge amount of friction between my sister and I that she didn't speak to me for 6 months. Now, my sister is one of those people who does not like anything resembling confrontation. So I found that the best way is just to say, well, that's not really true. If I sent you the information that shows that it's not true, would you read it? And I've learned that she'll say, "Oh yes, of course," and then never will. So it's very hard to break down these walls. The best thing you can do is really just love them and don't judge them. I don't want to say that they can't change, but I think expecting them to change is pulling the speck out of their eye. And I think
really like that.
It's
okay, but what if it's detrimental to them and the society?
If it's detrimental to them and society, then perhaps you really need to you need to step in a different way. But I'm not qualified to say what that way is. That's where I would lean on Diane
or Greg more than me.
Greg, I'm a chemist. What? I can't even explain to people what I do for a living because it's like they won't understand it. I don't. If I'm not an expert on something, I'm going to go to the experts. Mm-hmm. And exactly. Are they doing physical damage to her? Financially, kind of yes, but you know what? It's their money, and I can't tell them how to spend their money.
Yeah, and are they being taken advantage of in a way that they're not really aware? And that if they were aware, they would not want to be taken advantage of in that way, mm-hmm. And is there a way to help them see that, and you aren't changing their belief system is just not that important to me. It all crumbles anyway. None of them hold water. a lot these belief systems that are built around kind of a cult leader, a charismatic narcissist, essentially, is is tip is really none of them hold water, but that doesn't matter because they're not there for they just I thought terminating cliches are often kind of part of a cult like environment, is that they repeat these phrases that's all they have to say. Let's not talk anymore. God said is what it usually boils down to. Well, God said. And so how can you question that? If God said, and we're mere humans, we can't understand God's way. I should have, and this is the second coming of Christ or whatever, they don't care. They just need to be able to stay in that comfy place they are and repeat these phrases so that they don't have to look further. But what they don't want, really no one wants, is to be rape or soul rape. No one wants to be taken advantage of in that deep way, have the best part of you, turned into an asset for someone else. And so that's the job. It's a hard job, but it's doable. And I think faith leaders have a really important role in observing and helping people understand how not to be taken advantage of in that very deep and precious way.
I was really hoping that the phrase charismatic narcissist would appear tonight. Thank you, Diane.
That's the leaders,
Beat me
right?
to it.
Oh, it's like it's the absolute center of the personality that starts or draws in those that are seeking. Charismatic, happy, energetic,
Hey.
and good looking, whatever society deems that is, and so self-centered, and confident that they are right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
victims. They always play the victims,
And
including themselves, to say they're not just hurting me, they're hurting you.
look who's
That's something I
exploited
see
primarily.
all over.
The primary exploitation, 70% or around 70%, I think is the figure, of cult members are women.
I don't
And
know. If you throw in mega, I'm not sure that's true anymore.
Yeah.
oh, that's true. Mhm.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
But
Yeah.
when you think about, the sexual abuse, the in some Christian cults for plural marriage, uh, um, child marriage,
Yeah.
those things that can happen in some Christian cults.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that charismatic narcissist is yeah.
And addicts, they're addicted to power, like we've said several times tonight in various ways. They're
Yeah.
so people addicted to power, lack of empathy, self-assured in their narcissism, and it's just kind of magnetic. People are drawn to that confidence and that absolute assuredness, and they have a way of seeing where people don't feel insecure, and they become the solution to that. So they pointed out, yes, you are bad. Look at this part of you that's so bad. And I am the solution to that. Take another workshop if it's Scientology or those self-improvement cults like Nexium and such, or pray harder if it's a religious cult, or, give more, tithe more, give more, whatever.
Yeah, it's always on the person, not the cult leader. It's always their fault. You're not praying enough. You're not giving enough money. You're not, so they're lacking, and the cult leader remains above the fray and able to do anything.
And
So,
unquestionable. And you can't question
yeah,
them, because to question them is you'll be ostracized by the rest of the community.
Well, then
And
God's anointed.
yeah,
You can't question God.
no.
yeah,
I mean, it's similar to faith healers. It's if you're not healed, it's because you don't have enough faith. It's not.
That is right.
I ain't going to the hospital to help anybody, but
yeah.
because they don't have faith there. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the hospital in the first place.
That's I've always been wondering why Benny Hinn never did his healing services at a hospital. I mean, true miracles right there, but never. But you mentioned those people that are never questioned. Nexium's founder, Keith Raniere, had the same thing, and really he wasn't questioned until he was actually charged, including sex trafficking.
Right. I was very involved in that group and even in the vow. But yeah, he was the smartest man on earth, though.
Yeah.
He,
Yeah, well,
it's not, it's God, smartest man on earth, or, the second coming of Christ, or a prophet, or whatever.
Yeah, and then you've got the crazies who people, I don't know why they go, like Victor Barnard. I mean, the man wore white flowing robes and walked with a staff, told people he was Jesus, the Messiah, the Holy Spirit, was having sex with 12 and 13-year-olds and the wives of his followers before he finally ran off to Washington and then Brazil and then finally got caught. Thank God he's in prison now. But there's something about people need a purpose larger than themselves.
Yes. And they need community. And I think it's so lonely these days with the internet, and families that aren't, the extended families just don't happen like they used to, and not that long ago, a couple generations ago, it was very different. And I think people are lonely and they lack community. So how can people get their needs met in healthy ways, and not so that they're not so susceptible to,
being conned.
Yeah, being conned.
Yeah. And I almost wonder if some cults start somewhat unintentionally.
Mm-hmm.
I'd agree with that.
That there's an honest premise, maybe a genuine premise behind the founding of something that's meant to do good.
Yes.
For example,
even all the religions too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if for example, Diane, you probably know this, the Family Federation of World Peace and Unification, their website talks about all this stuff on love.
That's the Moonies, for anyone who doesn't realize who he's talking about.
Yeah. And it's still, they claim 3 million members worldwide. But here's this start, though, that starts on something like, hey, let's really learn how to love well. But then somewhere along the line, whether it's that charismatic narcissist or somebody else involved in being a charismatic narcissist, takes that and recognizes the power behind what can be done with it. And then everything from there starts to spiral out of control. Now, there are some people,
like Marty said, you get a taste of power. It's very addictive. And
absolutely,
like with any addiction, no, you can't get enough. The more you get, the more you want.
Absolutely. I know somebody like Jim Jones, I think he was, that was just his personality. Jim Jones.
I remember sitting in the church thinking, this is weird. I was young. 8, 7, 8 maybe. Maybe even younger. And my mom was like, oh my God, that was great. He was on fire. And like 2 years later, the Jonestown Massacre happened.
Well, that's the Wesley line, isn't it? A man who sets himself on fire for the Lord, people will come from miles around to watch him burn. And that's people. I mean, it's so many of these guys are basically just Tony Robbins, but they're and that's not to knock Tony Robbins,
right?
But I mean, that's the essential appeal. I mean,
It's
that charismatic narcissist. Tony Robbins is at the top of that.
The appeal is like, it's in the eye of the beauty's in the eye of the beholder kind of thing. So the guy with the robe and the cane, to some people, that's what they see as holy. They see this person, Keith Raniere was not that charming really, but he had a way about him. Sun Myung Moon had a certain way. There's, white supremacist leaders have a certain different kind, and people are drawn to different kinds of energy, kind of, I think.
Okay, so we are at the top of the hour, and I'm sure we could talk for another hour on this. But as we close the show, can each of you offer 1 or 2 signs of a cult and your final words, and where can people find you? I will start with you, Diane.
I think when you see that that they're using tactics that take advantage of people's most precious part of who they are, um, I think that's what we should be really concerned about. And when there's polarization, if you want to control people, you have to create a them, because you'd have to have an us, and we have to be the only ones that really are right and good. So what if there's polarization is a real red flag. So that's, I think, what was the other part of the question to say?
Final words, and where can people find you?
Oh, yeah, just I think it's so important that we all work together to understand this more. So I really appreciate you bringing this topic up for discussion. And antidote.ngo is the website. So.
And your book is
Oh,
available
and
on
yeah,
Amazon.
my book is my memoir. It's the time from when I joined the Moonies, and it goes into a lot of details about what that was like. And then as a deprogrammer in those 5 years I spent pulling people out. So it's called Shoes of a Servant, My Unconditional Devotion to a Lie.
Okay, Fireside Peeps, go buy her book. Thank you so much for coming on, Diane.
Yeah, thank you.
Greg, final words, and where can people find you?
Oh, Diane said a couple good pieces. I think another one too is if somebody's giving you absolutes, this is the way it is. If somebody's tossing it at you like Bible thumping, and that this is the way it has to be, that's when the questions need to start rising. I as a pastor, I know I never have all the answers. Rarely do I have a answer. I can help talk through it with a bunch of people, but I'm not going to claim to own any of it. If that's the way it comes out, if something is it's like that saying, if something is too good to be true, chances are it's probably not that true. And I can be found here in Southeast Michigan through a Detroit Beer and Hymns social media, and also St. Thomas Community Presbyterian Churches is my new pulpit that I just started at the beginning of this year. What a great group of people here in Shelby Township on the southeast side of Michigan. Just really excited to be in ministry here. Just love the Mitten State. We're down over here.
Okay. Thank you so much for being on the show again. And I have an analogy that I think is funnier because of who's on the show today. But I always say, if different shampoo works for different people, we can't have one theology. So, and I think this show encapsulates with the two bald men with the shampoo analogy.
They have beards that need washing.
Yeah, severe. So if we can't, if there isn't a shampoo that works for everyone, there's definitely not going to be beliefs. Marty, thank you so much for being on again. And any key signs that you'd like to pass on, and final words, and where can people find you?
If you find yourself surrounded by people who are telling you how wonderful one person is, and they are and they suggest that, oh, you should get away for a year from your family to work with us, or something like that, where it's clear that they're trying to isolate you. And you've got to be aware that it's going to sound really cool when they describe it. You probably want to do a deep dive into who the hell they are before you start packing your bags. Just kind of accept it, give it a jaundiced eye, and then go find out who they are. Because
solid advice.
These people are not good at hiding who they are. It didn't take me any time whatsoever to figure out that they were. Once I decided that I would look into them, of course, I didn't have that. There was no Wikipedia page. There was no, World Wide Web when my sister got.
That decision sets you apart. That one decision, just to look into it.
Just look into it. It's the easiest way to keep from making a bad mistake, because odds are you're getting conned, and it may be money. It may be just about anything. It could. I'm sure. Yeah,
Gosh.
what was it? Patty Hearst probably
Oh, yeah.
thought she was doing a very cool thing all those years ago. Um, and it's the same kind of tactics. People can be manipulated to believe almost anything. It's how the brown shirts got started. It's also why they all ended up dead.
Well, again, thank you all for being on the show. I think this was a really valuable conversation. And according to the comments, the audience agrees. I'm going to send you backstage. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I hope you got a lot out of that. If not for yourself, then for maybe a friend or a family member who is clouded by some of their beliefs. Next week's show is actually jumping off of this one. It's what starts deconstruction, what starts deconstructing your religious beliefs and how people start the process. So join us next week for that, and have an amazing week. And as always, you know it, walk in love. Mwah! See you then.